What's one of the potential side effects that could be holding you in lordosis? That's what we're going to look at in this tutorial, and we're going to be talking about the muscles involved and how we can essentially move out of that side effect. If you are struggling with lordosis and you want some help, please do click the link in the description below and you'll go through to my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week online program. The side effect that could be holding you in lordosis is internal rotation. Now, obviously I'm exaggerating there, but when we go into this extended anterior pelvic tilt and lordotic posture, one of the side effects that can come along with that is a hip internal rotation. That can then have a further side effect down in the knee and down in the foot and the ankle as well. So what we need to be able to do is get ourselves out of that internal rotation, or at least the tight muscles that are holding us there, to be able to open out the hip so we can get into a better external rotation, but essentially we want to be in a sort of neutral hip alignment position, but we want to be able to internally rotate and externally rotate. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, and what we're going to do next is talk a little bit more about the muscles involved, and that will then help us understand how we can get out of it. A lot of people understand the muscles of lordosis. So when we come into this position, we get a sort of a squashing of these muscles here, we get a lengthening of these muscles here, we get a tightness through the hip flexors. What a lot of people don't understand is when it comes to the side effect of that hip internal rotation, all the muscles that can become involved in that. And then we need to sort of untie that knot before we can untie the knot of lordosis. So some of the muscles that we're talking about, we've got glute medius, mainly the anterior fibers, so the fibers on the front of the hip. Then we're talking about glute minimus, tensor fasciae lata essentially on the front of the hip, but it's just laterally. And then all the adductors that go down the inside of the leg. All those muscles are pulling you inward, holding your knee inward, and internally rotating you at the hip. So what we need to be able to do is get those muscles open, and essentially we're going into an external rotation. We're going to go through two sort of fundamental stretches to be able to externally, or at least get the muscles out of that internal rotation state. So the first one that we're going to do is we're going to come down onto one knee. So we're going to come down into this position. Now if we were in internal rotation, we'd be in like this. So what we're going to do is we're essentially just going to move that leg out into external rotation. We're going to add a little bit to it, because it's not quite as simple as just pushing it out. We're going to take a wide stance, so we're going to have that foot out wide from this stance knee. That's starting the external rotation, so we're going to be opening out the adductor muscles here. What we're then going to do is we're going to put a hand on the floor, and we're just going to use our hand and just push it out that little bit further. That's only going to enhance the stretch through here, but what you're also going to find, there's going to be an opening of that hip joint, and you may well find it stretching a little bit more up in this position. So this would be stretch number one that we would go into. We're down on one knee, we've got one hand on the floor, and we're pushing out here. The other thing to be mindful of is what the spine's doing. Again, we want to try and maintain a proper posture, so we're not coming into this lordotic posture. We're trying to come into much sort of more neutral, straighter spine, and then we're pushing out in that position, which is going to aid the external rotation of the hip. Now this type of stretch is a little bit more mild, so you may find this stretch a little bit easier to do than the next stretch that we're going to do, because the next stretch is a little bit more extreme when it comes to external rotation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, let's just say, the most extreme version of this one, and then we'll talk about some ways in which we can minimize how extreme it is. And we're going to use this step, so it's a little raised surface that we need. Now to start with, I'm not going to have the mat there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this leg into an external rotation. So what we want to be able to do is we come into this position, and then we go to here. So this, I'm down on one knee, and you can see this is quite an extreme position for the external rotation, because I've got my knee all the way down on the floor, and I've got my ankle on the step, and I've also got my ankle on there as well. So I'm creating a parallel line with the floor, and I'm holding that position. Now this can well do the adductors, but it's much more the hip external, or it's pulling the hip into external rotation, which is going to be opening out all those muscles that we talked about before with regards to glute medius, the anterior fibers, glute minimus and tensor fasciae lata. Now, how we can make it a slightly less extreme is we can add some sort of raise to surface to where the knee goes. So we don't go into quite an extreme external rotation. Now, obviously I'm using a mat here. You could have a couple of cushions. You could have one cushion, two cushions, three cushions, whatever works for you. But essentially what we're trying to do is just raise the knee up, so into that position. So it's not as an extreme position. You may find that here is enough, whereas we want to be able to get down here. So if you are using, say, 3 cushions, and you can get into that position, do that for 3 or 4 weeks. Take a cushion away, go down to 2 cushions, 3 or 4 weeks. Take a cushion away, go down to 1 cushion, 3 or 4 weeks. Then finally go onto the step on its own, 3 or 4 weeks. And then you'll find that you're opening out those muscles, which will take you out of that internal rotation. There are also 3 exercises that we're going to look at that are going to enhance the external rotation. So if we can open it out with stretches, we can then start using exercises to build in the muscle activity that we need to be able to hold the position much more effectively. So we're going to use a bridge, a squat and a clam. Now, there are some people that are going to disagree with that exercise selection. These aren't the only exercises that you can use, but what they do, or what they are able to do, is help you externally rotate the hip. So we'll start with the bridge, and we're going to use a band to help us. So just a nice short band, and all we're doing is we're going to put band around just below the knees. We're going to have a sort of a hip to shoulder width apart stance with the feet, and then we're going to lie back. We're going to push the knees out into that external rotation, and then we're going to come up and squeeze the hips. And what that's going to help us do, that's going to allow us to access the posterior fibers of glute medius, also glute max, to be able to hold the hip in a better position. So we would hold that position, you would hold that for a period of time, come down, and then you would start again with the second set. Now, how long you do, that is sort of how long is a piece of string. It will depend on the individual. If someone can hold that position for longer, then they can obviously go for longer. If someone can't, then they won't go that long. So exercise number 1 is the bridge. So it's coming down into that position, having a hip to shoulder width apart, and then just pushing out into external rotation to relax the anterior fibers of glute medius and activate the more posterior fibers. Now that's to say, it's not like an on and off switch, it's to heighten and dampen. So heighten the posterior and dampen the the posterior and the anterior. So you heighten the posterior and dampen the anterior. The second one is the squat. We're essentially doing the same thing, we're just taking the band away. So what we're now going to do is consciously push our knees out as we go down. So we come into this position, we push the knees out, and then we come back up and we allow them to gravitate in. What we don't allow them to do is internally rotate into that position. So they come out, we push them out as we go down, and then we come back up. Again, that external rotation of the hip, again, it's not a lot, but it's just trying to get the knees out over the outside of the feet. Again, that's going to heighten the activity at the back, dampen it at the front. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about when we go down into that squat. But also, we don't want to be going into that sticking the bum out, because that again is reinforcing that lordotic position. We want to maintain the proper posture as we go down, externally rotate at the hip by pushing the knees out, and that's going to give us a much better muscle activation sequence, if you will, to be able to get the muscles working, the right muscles working at the right time. The third exercise being the clam. Now again, this one, I rarely use this exercise, so it's not one that I would always recommend, but what it does allow you to do, it does allow you to feel the area of the muscle that you want working. And what it also does is well, one, it's a very simple exercise, and it externally rotates the hip. So again, we need the band around the knees, but this time we come onto our side like this. We have a slight hinge at the hip and bend at the knee. And then all we're basically doing is just pulling that open. Now, it's key here, what we don't do is just open out, but open out our whole body, because that's sort of defeating the object. What we want to be able to do is keep the body forward and then rotate at the hip. Again, it's accessing these posterior fibers of glute medius to be able to heighten their activity, to help, once we've relaxed them with the stretches, it helps pull the hip out of that internal rotation. So that's the type of thing that we want to be focusing on when we're talking about getting us out of hip internal rotation, if we've got it, with our lordosis. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the content, please hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you've got a comment or a question, please leave it below. And if you want to watch more, hit the subscribe and the bell icon.